two pieces of advice. And I have looked back, and I've looked back over the decades of my life. I was born right after Pearl Harbor, and 10 years later was the Cold War and the Berlin Wall, and I was in grade school and then in high school, and then we had the Bay of Pigs, and most people wouldn't remember Nikita Khrushchev at the UN banging his shoe on the table saying, "We will bury you." Vietnam War. The prime hit 10% for the first time in the early 70s. We had Watergate.
We're now into my lifetime, by the way. I'm happy to jump in with you.
One of the biggest selling books in the 70s was The Late Great Planet Earth.
Yes, it was.
The 80s, nobody thought we were going to, when we approached 1980, nobody thought we would survive because of inflation. We would never, ever, ever see a single rate mortgage, a fixed rate mortgage again. Just would not exist. You would never see an 8% mortgage in the 80s. In the 90s, we had war early on. We hadn't even seen Y2K yet. And in the 2000s, with 9/11. So when I've looked back over my life, I said either I've been really unlucky to see all these things, or I've come to a conclusion. And that is that economic uncertainty is certain. We just don't know what it's going to be. It will always be there. Now that's a really important thing, because it says when I'm making my financial decisions, I know that uncertainty is going to be there, be it a health issue or an economic issue or a loss of job issue or something. But there's going to be economic uncertainties. That's why I live with God's principles, and I am prepared for that uncertainty. I was going to say one other thing. I've lived through the greatest run-up in wealth that the world has ever seen. There's never been a culture like this one. Never. Romans, Japanese, nobody has ever approached the wealth that America has. And we've seen a corresponding decline in morality as the wealth has gone up. I discovered some time ago a letter that John Steinbeck, who was an author, who wrote to Adlai Stevenson, and it was published in 1959. I was a senior in high school in 1959. And in that letter to Adlai Stevenson, now this is 1959. This was a different era than where we live today in terms of wealth. And he said, "A strange species we are. We can stand anything that God and nature can throw at us, save plenty. If I wanted to destroy a nation, I would give it too much, and I would have it on its knees, miserable, greedy, rich, and sick." I've seen that. He was not a prophet, but he was prophetic. And I've seen that. And I think we've reached a point where people are beginning to realize it is not wealth that's going to provide satisfaction. I think it's the greatest opportunity for the church that we've ever had in my lifetime, because people know that money doesn't solve it. We've seen $300 million contracts with athletes and jets, and we've seen all this wealth, and we've not seen happiness. So thinking that more is the answer, it's not. More equals more dilemma and confusion. And so my two pieces are, don't fall into the trap of thinking that prosperity is the answer. It's not. It still is security in the Lord. And secondly, economic uncertainty is certain.